So ASUS just announced a bunch of brand new laptops, but I want to specifically focus on the Zephyrus ROG G16 and M16 for this video because there's a couple of design changes and decisions that ASUS decided to make, and depending on who you are, you just might not agree with. First of all, the G15 from last year and the previous year is no longer a thing. It's now been bumped up to a G16, which means it's going to be a 16:10 aspect ratio and obviously a 16-inch display. Now, the reason why I have the 2022 M16 on the table right now is because this is the exact chassis, look, port lineup, everything besides the internals that the new G16 is going to use. So if you pick up a 2023 G16, this is what the port lineup is going to look like. Power connector is going to be right here, up to 280 watt brick. HDMI 2.1, you're gonna have an RJ45 port. It's gonna have a USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type A port, 2 Type-C ports, one of them is gonna be Thunderbolt 4, and of course you're gonna have a combo jack. On the right-hand side, you're gonna have a micro SD card and a USB-A port. Now with the M16, the difference will be that this power connector is getting moved all the way to the back, which I personally prefer because it just feels a lot cleaner. There's gonna be no more RJ45 port on the M16. It's exclusive to the G16 now, and one of these Type-C ports is gonna be moved to the right-hand side. Now this is exactly what the front or lid of the G16 is gonna look like. The only difference is it's not gonna be as dark as the M16. The color of this will be a shade lighter for the G16 lineup, and the new M16 is gonna stick with this black color, but also offer a white version. Now, the other thing is the new M16 has the option to be bought with an Animatrix display. Now, if you do go for this, it will increase the weight from 4.63 pounds to over 5. And personally, if you have to pay more for it, it's really not worth it. Let's be honest here, the Animatrix on the back of the laptop not only sucks battery life, but it just looks very cringy and it reminds me of a cheap Las Vegas casino. The G16 will not have an Animatrix back panel, but it's also a lighter laptop at 4.41 pounds compared to 4.63. Now, it's gonna have the same keyboard on both laptops, a 1.7 millimeter travel distance. It's gonna have the same keyboard. It's gonna feel super comfortable to type on. Both the G16 and M16 are gonna have 6 speakers to work with and obviously support Dolby Atmos. Both laptops are gonna have the ergo hinge, so it's gonna be able to go up and down when you open up the lid, which means there will be better airflow for cooling. Display is no longer gonna have that thick bezel. I don't know if you guys remember, but the old G15 had a thick bezel on the bottom, so it's gonna look a lot cleaner with the new M16 and G16. Now, some of you out there don't like that because you were concerned that air from the fans would blow against the display, but I've been using these M16s for the past couple of years, and that's never been an issue. Big touchpad, you have that like rubberized texture on the deck of the keyboard, which feels great. Now the M16 is gonna be slightly more refined. Like you're gonna have a proper aluminum lid with a magnesium alloy body, whereas the G16 is gonna be completely magnesium alloy. Now the display is gonna go up to QHD. There is a mini LED version that you can get with either laptop. It's gonna run at 165 Hertz, but if you buy the regular QHD panel that's not mini LED, then it's gonna be 240 Hertz. And if that's something you still don't want, there's a full HD version that you can choose from as well. G-Sync on the M16, which is very viable. And then of course, both of these laptops will have a 1080p webcam. Now specs are super interesting because the G16 is no longer using an AMD processor. And that's kind of disappointing because that's what made the G15 so different from the M16. Some people just wanted an AMD processor, even though technically it didn't perform as well as the Intel version, for the better battery life. And that's kind of being taken away with this new G16. Now granted, if you want the fastest Intel processor in this series, it's probably gonna be in the M16 up to an i9-13900H. I'm not 100% sure because I made this video before Intel announced its actual processors that are gonna go inside this laptop, which means the G16 might just top out with an i7-13700H. Both of these laptops are gonna have NVIDIA RTX 40 series GPUs. They're gonna be running at 120 watts plus dynamic boost, and they can both support up to 2 terabytes of PCIe Gen 4 NVMe SSDs. Now granted, you will get a faster GPU version if you buy the M16 because I feel like the slightly bigger chassis is gonna allow for tiny bit better cooling. But there's one major issue with the G16. Because it's using last year's M16 chassis, That means only one of the DIMM slots are upgradable. The other DIMM slot is completely soldered onto the motherboard. If you want 2 slots to upgrade, you have to move to the M16 because the new M16 is slightly different and is allowing 2 slots to be utilized. Now, for some of you, it might not be a big deal because 48 gigabytes is more than plenty, but if you want true 64 running in dual channel configuration, then you're gonna have to go for the M16 instead. Now, I haven't benchmarked 13th gen mobile processors yet, but you can expect anywhere from a 10 to 11% performance increase with single core clock speeds. You can expect anywhere from 30 to 40% increase in multi-core clock speeds if you're measuring via synthetic benchmarks, but workloads will depend. Like if you're gaming, probably 10 to 12%. If you're a creator, anywhere from 10 to 15%. It really comes down to what you're doing. If it's very GPU specific, then you might see a bigger uplift overall. Fan noise is probably gonna be very, very similar to the previous year. Both of these laptops are getting liquid metal on the CPU and GPU, so it should run a little bit cooler compared to the previous version, but it's really hard to say what battery life is. I do know it's not gonna be as good as last year's AMD version, but I do expect these Intel CPUs to run very similar to last year's models. Now, hopefully this video provided a little bit of clarity between these 2 laptops. The G16 will be priced a bit more affordably, whereas the M16 is really being geared towards users who want to get the most out of this sort of style. But it's kind of disappointing that the AMD processor is no longer a thing because I know a lot of you out there just prefer better battery life and you don't care if you have that slightly more performance that the Intel processor provides. Anyway, stay tuned for more laptop announcements coming out of CES. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that. And obviously, I'm gonna be reviewing all these laptops when they come into the studio. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one.